Hi, Jeremy Cordeaux in the Court of Public Opinion. I'm just on air here to let you know that we'll be live streaming the Court of Public Opinion every Friday between 9 o'clock and 12 on jeremycordeaux.com. Please join us. We'd love to have you.
A room without books is like a body without a soul.
Hi and welcome to Sundoku, the podcast for anyone who's already planning their holiday reading. I'm Cath Keneally.
And I'm Annie Hastwell. An episode 34 of Sundoku coming up. But first, the literary news of the moment, of course, is the announcement of this year's Booker Prize.
Yes, Annie, and I am looking forward to reading this. It's Irish author Paul Lynch, Prophet Song. It's his fifth novel. I'm cheating here, I haven't read it, but it looks fascinating. It's apparently set in an imagined Ireland where the right-wing factions are coming into their own. There's a new repressive government, and the main characters, who's a microbiologist, her husband is senior in the teachers' union, and the secret police turn up on the doorstep and take him away. And she's left to try and keep the family together in a situation of unfolding civil war.
Politics, dystopia.
Yeah, and
what we've come to expect, really.
What we have come to expect, because last year's winner was The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, and that was set in Sri Lanka, and I think the protagonist wakes up dead. Is that not right?
That is right. And in fact, that's a very good segue, because the novel that I am going to be talking to the author of today, the protagonist also is dead. And I think it's an interesting genre. I actually looked up other novels that have got dead narrators, and there are quite a few of them.
Well, one of my favourites is Louise Doughty's Platform 7.
Oh, I don't know that.
I think it's one of the best crime novels I've ever read, and the character is dead and she's hovering around Platform 7 on this railway station, which is where she met her end.
Oh, I'd like to read that. It's a great genre because it allows you to just float around with this sort of bird's eye view of everybody.
Yeah, and take your own sweet time, focus on the things you want to focus on as a dead person for whom the things that matter to us don't really matter anymore.
Well, I'll be talking to Sarah Smith, who has gone from being a scriptwriter in TV series to a novelist, and she's indeed has a dead narrator.
Okay.
In The 12 Steps to a Long and Fulfilling Death.
Okay, I like the sound of that. And I will later on be talking to translator Mireille Vignol, who I met recently in Melbourne. Fascinating person, and she was just about to go off and host a translation slam. So I'll tell you all about that.
Wow. If you read a book in another language that has been in another language, you get this slightly different mindset, don't you?
You do, and you feel a lot of the time as though where the prose doesn't run very well in the English, something's gone wrong in the translation. You always quietly think, I bet I could have done better than that.
So it's a very delicate art.
It's a delicate art,
yeah.
and it's contentious, and that's what apparently comes out in a translation slam event.
I think we notice it a lot these days because of subtitles too. I remember watching a Chinese movie years ago, and they would talk and talk and talk, and then there would be like a three or four words. I was thinking, that's a very economical sort of or uneconomical language.
That's right, absolutely.
But I don't think we were getting the whole picture somehow.
That's right, and I practice my languages by watching movies or drama series in those languages, in the original language with subtitles, and kidding myself that I could have done better there if I'm quick enough to catch up, and I think, no, that's not quite right.
We all speak Swedish now, don't we?
Yeah, that's right.
Norwegian.
Anything Scandi we can do.
So let's go to Sarah Smith's book, 12 Steps to a Long and Fulfilling Death. Now, Sarah's had an exciting career as a scriptwriter in both Australia and Hollywood, and after 30 years in that game, she turned her hand to writing a novel recently. This is the result. It's a fast-paced, really funny look at life in the LA fast lane, and its narrator, Stacey, is already dead. But she can't move on till she finds out how and why she died. So here's Sarah telling me about her central character.
Stacey is a 30-year-old woman who's grown up in Los Angeles, and she's kind of insecure. We do meet her when she's, pretty well straight away she is dead. No spoiler alerts because it happens on page 1. But I think she's a person who's been driven by her emotions and her feelings of inadequacy and insecurity and a lot of things I think we can all relate to. But it's because of her death that she actually stops and reflects about why does she have all those emotions and where do they all come from and were they really serving her? So that's it. Kind of has some success but not, or feels like she hasn't quite lived up to her potential. And
then she's dead.
And then she's dead. That's right. And I think the thing, strangely enough, I started writing the novel when I was living in Los Angeles. And even though I'm a lot older than this main character, I had been pitching a couple of television shows because I'd worked in television a lot. And then I was just waiting to hear back from people. And while I was waiting, you do tend to feel a little bit on the outer. And I had a lot of time to reflect on, well, what was I doing? What was I trying to achieve? And so I guess those same emotions I instilled into my main character.
Now, she's dead, but she's not dead. So tell us about the world that she slowly realises she inhabits. First of all, she doesn't think she's dead for a start and can't work out why people aren't answering her. But she hangs around for quite a while trying to work out who killed her in this kind of netherworld. Can you describe that?
I mean, look, I started with the idea of, okay, if she's a ghost, what is the world of a ghost? What do they see and how do we imagine them? And the idea that, from various ghost stories that they're hanging around, maybe waiting to, actually maybe not knowing that they're dead. And I really like that idea to begin with, that she's almost like an unreliable narrator, like, hang on a minute, why isn't my phone working? And why isn't anyone answering me? And what are all these people doing in that lounge room? And then when she does gradually realize it, it's like, well, what now? And, just even that confused idea of, well, if I'm still here and I haven't passed on somewhere, well, what does that mean? And so trying to figure out, well, is she here to, haunt her ex? Is she here to get revenge? Is she here to find out why she died? Because she also doesn't have a clear memory of how she actually died. And I also like that idea as well, that just because we're dead, it might not be apparent or clear how or what caused that death. So, and then I also was thinking about, well, what's a threat to you if you're in a ghost world, because you're dead, so you death's not the end point. And I created the idea of the intruders, that's these sort of displaced spirits that if she didn't find out what had happened to her relatively quickly, that she might end up as someone who just never finds out. And the worst fear I thought would be to just roam around aimlessly forever, not knowing who or what you were and having more and more memories go away.
Yes, like the unquiet dead, the stuff of horror movies too, isn't it? The people who haven't solved things and haven't moved on.
That's right. I mean, it's a sort of far worse idea than just dying, in a sense that you're trapped in sort of purgatory, really. And in the book, I have a grandmother who'd had Alzheimer's, but my mother did. And I often saw that as the most strangest disease, because you lose the person before they're gone. They're not there, they're not there. And there's a part when they, and it's very common that my mum would get up in the middle of the night fully dressed and ready to go out. So obviously something changed in their perception where they didn't know night from day. And so that was also horrifying, in a sense that you think, well, if you don't have that any sense of reality, who are you and what are you doing roaming around? What's going on in that, with her? So I tapped into that as well, that feeling of displacement.
Now she's watching from the afterlife and trying to work out what happened to her, how she did die. It was a horrible car accident, but there was more foul play involved. And she's looking at the people in her life, and she sort of gets an interesting perspective from watching them when she's not there. Like, she watches her funeral, she watches her autopsy, but she also kind of gets the feel of who you could trust and who you couldn't, what people say about you.
Yes. I do think that's true of all of us. We try not to upset people. We be polite, and so we might not get the full picture of how other people perceive us. We know how we perceive them. I mean, look, it sounds a bit heavy, but it's actually quite light-hearted as well. Stacey's not totally aware of,
Oh no, a lot of humour.
Foibles. It's always interesting and easy to see the faults and mistakes other people, make, but we are all our own worst enemies. I really believe that, because we just don't see it. We don't see how we may have spoken to someone or been, or, whatever it is that's, making us a certain way.
Gee, I hope we don't all have to die to find out too. Los Angeles is the setting. Now, you've obviously spent time there, and it comes in from a lot of really barbed humour. What kind of relationship does that city have with death? Was that part of the reason why you chose the death idea?
Look, very much so. I was, like I said, I'd gone over there. I'd finished working on a show here in Sydney, and I went over to pitch a couple of ideas. And Americans give great meetings, and I had, it was initially, terrific, and everybody, was embracing, and you think, oh, right, it's all going to happen. But one cultural difference that I really noticed is, Australians will email back to you, and even if you just say, yep, got the material, talk soon. Americans don't. Like, they actually don't respond to emails. And it was this really weird thing where I was like, is it just me? And I talked to a few people, and they all went, no, that's unless they've got something to tell you, they don't. So there's this sense that you go, oh, am I, being, even though there's a lot of cultural similarities, the whole all of Los Angeles is based around film and television. And if you're in it and you're in the thick of it, there's a big merry-go-round, and it's moving really, frenetically, and you can be a part of it. And if you're just on, waiting to kind of for that door to open or to jump on the carousel, it can be very odd and strange. And I guess the other thing that I was doing, because I was new to the place, I had some friends there, so that was, was great. But, you observe a place differently when you're, new to it. When you live in the city for many years, you just tend to go down to the same coffee shops and do the same things that you normally do every, Saturday or something. But because I was getting out and about and, just observing it in that way, I was aware of the transient nature of fame and fortune as well. Like they've got the Hollywood Walk of Stars, and as you walk down it, you'll see, there's obviously some people's names that jump out at you, Charlie Chaplin or whatever, but there's a lot of names that you've never heard of, and you think, wow, they were all famous once, enough to get a star. I wonder what they did. So you're aware that it's almost like a city of ghosts, and at one stage it was actually the murder capital of the world back in the 70s. I think there's an underbelly to it. So there's this surface level, there's this underbelly level, there's the past,
and there's also that American, particularly, I mean, we all have it now, I suppose, but the belief that, the 12-step program, there's always a solution. You're never going to die. So that must have been particularly obvious there, I would think.
Well, it is. Pretty well every coffee shop has people writing their own screenplays. Every Uber driver is a producer or a director, or, in every way is an actor. So it has a strange, I guess everybody wants to be, needing therapy to get through the industry that you want to try and crack into.
So there's Stacey. She hasn't made much of her life so far. She's got some troubled undercurrents going on there. She's dead, and there's her fiancé, who doesn't stay faithful very long after she dies. She's got a few friends, her family. There's a lot of potential candidates for who might have killed her. And then there's a detective, Beau Fontaine, who is particularly, shall we say, sensitive to her presence as she hangs about, trying to be noticed. Tell us how it becomes a detective story.
Well, one thing I noticed when I was in Los Angeles, that there are a lot of people that seem to be from somewhere else, that it's a city that attracts people. They all come to it. And I thought, well, I would like my detective to be from somewhere else as well. And when I was starting to plot out the story and looking at what I needed to tell this story, I thought it would be interesting to have, I didn't want to do just a straight out murder mystery. I was drawn to the idea of a ghost story, but with a mystery as to how did she become a ghost. So then I thought, well, I will need a detective, but I like the idea that detective was tuned into her, and the reason that is because his wife is dying. So that the notion that when you're close to anyone who, like I noticed after with my mum with Alzheimer's, and then after she passed away, you become very aware of other things other than just what's going on around you, so I wanted him to be tuned in a way that normally you wouldn't, so that he's not a doubter. I wanted someone to believe, okay, that there might be more to life than just what we see in front of our face.
Now, you've created quite a devious plot with a lot of twists and turns. How much of a challenge is it to keep the reader guessing all the way?
A lot. I had to work out a timeline because obviously she was dead, but then I had to build up to the point of when she died and why, and also with a murder mystery, because in a way it is a traditional story. I know that sounds bizarre given I've got a ghost in there as well, but when it's a murder mystery, so every one of those people I had to figure out, well, let's make them a viable suspect. Yeah, that's right. And look, some things occurred to me as I was doing it, and some things I had broad brushstroke plot, but then I would go, that doesn't, that's too obvious, or I need to go back and figure out a way to either hide the fact that person may or may not be the right person, or to add to the suspicion. So yeah, I think I definitely created a difficult pattern for the first one.
Now, you're a screenwriter by trade. Do you storyboard a novel? Like, how much crossover is there in the two skills?
Funnily enough, I normally would plot out everything before I started writing a script, but with this, I just started writing because I think I was just wanting to see whether I could write a novel, and because I was waiting to hear about some things, and I actually had a show cancelled in Australia, so I was like, I don't want to write another television show that relies on so many other people. I wonder if I can just have my own voice in a novel form. So I wrote about 2 chapters, maybe 3 chapters, and then I went, right, well, I better stop now and figure out what I'm doing. So then I, like I said, I broad brush stroked, some ideas I had for chapters, but then where it was going and how the investigation and her story would evolve, and then obviously jumping back and forth pre-death and post-death to developments. But writing a novel is just there's a lot more to it, and a lot more evolves as you write. And I think having read now a few books on writing novels, it seems to be a common thing that sometimes the narrative, it'll take you in a different direction than what you thought you were going to do, and then you need to adjust to it. So that happened a few times, which was quite sort of delightful. That's
interesting, isn't it? So it takes on a life of its own more than a screenplay would.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, a screenplay does evolve as well. There's, it's not really going to be the first draft that gets made. But I think, especially in television, because everything's you work it all out, you plot it, there's people in the room, and that will all change. But the novel, yes, there's something about it where you're in that world and you've created these characters, and suddenly something will present that you think, okay, I should explore that. So that was, it was a lot of fun.
This could be a spoiler, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but did you always know who did it?
I don't want to say no, because it sounds like wasn't prepared, but I had a couple of in mind. So I thought, I actually thought I could go a couple of different routes, but I really wanted to explore what would be the most impactful and mean the most to that lead character. I didn't want it to just be like, that figures. So I really sort of dug deep into the backstories to find something that was going to sort of explain who she was as well, rather than just it was Professor Plum in the.
The audience gets quite invested in a story, don't they? And it can be really annoying if it turns out to be someone that you couldn't have dreamed of. You want to have a sense that you're sort of with the story on the journey with the writer. I
know it's a real fine balancing act, because you don't want the the reader to go, oh, well, that was obvious from page 3, because you are promising a crime, a mystery story. So it has to have some mystery to it. But at the same time, you don't want to end up going, oh, right. So as I was saying before, like Professor Plum with the spanner in the, wherever it was, that you go, all right. And so, yes, in trying to work out in all of the people in Stacey's life, I wanted to, I guess dig deep on each character to figure out, well, what would the impact be if it turned out to be this person? So I was looking for something that reflected on Stacey.
It's a meditation in a way on what would drive someone to kill, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, if you listen to many crime podcasts or, any kind of crime shows, the reasons people kill, there's usually, I don't know, was it the 7 deadly sins, greed, jealousy, fear, money, tend to come back to those things, but then a million and one myriad ways that why people do it. Yeah, it's a strange thing, that, isn't it? The crossover point.
Did you drive your publishers mad with the fact that you kind of crossed a lot of genres here, because you've kind of got black humour, magic realism, and a detective story all rolled into one?
Luckily, my publishers, Ultimo Press and Alex Craig, liked it from the word go. So I did do another edit on it. But she did tell me, she said it's going to be a little bit tricky because of the cross genre, but that's what she really loved about it. And which was, it was great. I think people do like to have, it's easier in a sense if it's like, right, you're a Gone Girl, or you're a straight rural noir, or you're a thriller or something like that. So to have that bit of mix, but Alex was just right from the word go. I love it because it's different.
Now, Sarah, you're writing another book, I believe. How much? I
am.
How much can you tell us about that?
Look, I wanted to do something not completely different, but at the same time, it's a different story. I'm setting it in Fremantle. Fremantle in the southwest of WA. My dad lives over there, so and I lived there for many years, so I'm familiar with it. And but I suppose it's a slightly spooky crime as well. It's about a mother whose daughter doesn't think of her as her mother. So I wanted to look at reincarnation in a way, and so there's a sort of mystery crime involved with her.
You really like the spooky themes, don't you?
I do. I don't know whether, I think I always have, but I think it's a different area to explore.
It's one of my favourites. Look, thanks so much for talking to me today, and all the best with the next one.
Thank you.
Author and former scriptwriter Sarah Smith talking about her book 12 Steps to a Long and Fulfilling Death. It's a great read, it's clever and funny, and it's also deep and thoughtful because it's about death. And being based in LA also, where no one thinks they're going to die, and 12 steps to success is the usual 12 steps to a thin and beautiful body, but yeah, death is something we just don't talk about. So yeah, fascinating read, a great Christmas read, I would say.
I'm looking forward to that very much indeed. You're listening to Sundoku, the podcast for people who are going to be reading right over Christmas and through into the new year. And now to the delicate art of translating a book from one language to another. As I said earlier, it's not a straightforward matter. Connoisseurs, of course, are going to have their favourite translators of Proust, if that's their cup of tea, or we might, as I did, come fresh to Annie Ernaux because she won the Nobel Prize for Literature a year or two ago. I hadn't read her before. I hadn't read her in French, and as I was reading the English translation, I kept feeling as though there were bumps and inept moments where it was the translation that was at fault rather than Annie Ernaux. So for some people, translation is their bread and butter. And Mireille Vignol, who I was speaking to in Melbourne, mostly works for a Tahiti-based publisher of Pacific writers into French. And she has a fairly impressive list of Australian authors that she's translated, including Kate Grenville and other Australian writers. She's always on the lookout for new talent, but particularly among South Pacific writers who are lesser known and don't have many avenues into print or recognition. So when she was in Melbourne lately doing this and that, she hosted a translation slam where two translators went head-to-head over a piece from a novel about surfing, which I gather was projected behind the translators on stage so the audience could look at their efforts and rate them. If they knew the original French, maybe they didn't. But
you would need to have both languages, surely, to get the most out of it.
Apparently not, but I'll tell you afterwards what Peter Bukowski, who Mireille has actually translated him as a poet into French, he was there and he had fairly strong views about one translator being better than the other. So here's Mireille Vignol.
Basically, the principle is simple. We have a text. It's the first chapter of a French book called The Wave, La Vague, by Ingrid Astier. We've given this text to two translators from the French, Australian translators. They've translated it. I've received it about 3 days ago, and I've looked at the differences. I mean, it's always amazing how different a translation is from another. And so what I'm going to do on Wednesday is ask them to justify their choices, explain their choices. Why did they use this tense instead of that one? Why did they cut the sentence in two and the other one didn't? Why did they use that vocabulary, especially with slang? There's quite a fair bit of slang. So, why one word rather than another? And hopefully the audience will get into it as well. And we'll go through the first chapter. And I think for people who read fiction, and obviously read fiction in translation, if they read, French, Russian, German, Spanish authors, it's really interesting to see the process of translation, that it is not just one word will be that in that language. One word can be 10, 15 different things in the language. So it's all about how the mind works, how you choose, and also from your own personality, experience, and culture, you will have a different vocabulary, and therefore you will have a different translation.
Do you describe the book for the audience, or do the audience have a copy of the book to work from? Do they know what sort of a book you're talking about?
So what we'll do, that's a good point, I haven't really thought of it. What we'll do is that I'll have a PowerPoint with the French text on one side and then the two English texts. So we'll take it, I'm doing it like bit by bit. So I think you're right, I should give a bit of an introduction to the book. Thank you for that, because I didn't really plan that. But yeah, it's a good idea to give an introduction to the book so that they know. But in fact, what happens is that then you go into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
And my role will be to just move things along, because sometimes you can spend a long time talking about this and that. So there are differences that are really interesting, I think, and others that are just, okay, well, he said that. It's, it doesn't really matter. So the point is to get the good differences that can really, and we call it a slam, and in French it's a joute, like a joust, which sounds very medieval and bloody. But in my experience, translators will go, oh wow, yeah, you're right, that's really good idea. It's all about trying to build something better in the end, and just seeing how much, nothing is by chance. Everything is thought about, and is needs to be explained. So we work on the English, not on the French. Both translators are excellent. They understand the French perfectly. It's not about translating the meaning. It's about, and in this case, one is a novelist, and she adds a little bit of things because it sounds better, and she's more into appropriating the text and, doing basically her version that is very marked by her personality and her own style, I suppose. The others are closer to the text in French, follows more the structure of the French text, and but at times she also goes, it's very funny to see the different approach to the text.
And as a translator yourself, do you think that translators should be put through this exercise before they submit a translation?
Oh no, that would be really too taxing. I mean, I found the first time I did this exercise, I felt really naked. You're sort of there, your text is there, and then why did you do that? And I'm thinking, oh, Jesus, I don't know. It just sort of, you really have to question. And sometimes you knew exactly why you were doing it, but you don't remember exactly the thought process. So it's a bit, it's challenging. And what really surprised me is the first time I did it was the other translator was a very, very proper French guy, with a little bow tie and everything, very, very nice and proper, very different personality than mine. And at the end of it, when we looked at the text, I thought, I saw how much of my personality and his shone in the translation, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, you're supposed to be serving the text and faithful to the text and all that, but it's impossible. You really are, you translate with your world of words and knowledge, and it's scary.
And so are you resigned to that in your own practice, that is, the translation is you, or it has marks of you?
Well, it's funny, in France, we are the authors of the translations. Like I'm paid with the droit d'auteur, the royalties. Yeah. We are the author of the translation. So therefore, yes, you sort of think, it will belong to us to a point. Yeah. I mean, then, of course, we don't have to use the imagination and the structuring. No. We've got that, but within that, it can be very creative. That's why there are retranslations. That's why the classics are translated over and over again. It's necessary, yeah.
What's the translation of all the translations you've done that maybe you're fondest of or proudest of?
In Australian fiction, I think I'm really happy with having translated Kenneth Cook, because, and I think Australians don't know enough of Kenneth Cook. They only know Wake in Fright, and he's written a lot of different books and a lot of great books. So I'm proud of the fact that I brought him to France. I could say that. But I've really enjoyed translating Kate Grenville's, especially Sarah Thornhill. I really loved that book. And Peter Bakowski, poetry, I always said I'm never going to translate poetry, but then, the text got to talk to you. You've got to really feel a sort of a connection to it, and you're hearing the voice, and then you find the voice in your language. That's sort of how it works. And I've since translated a second book of poetry, the Ruby Moonlight by Ali Kobi Ekerman, and that's been a really very interesting and challenging sort of experience. And every time, I'm just thinking it could have been done differently about translating and the different versions you could do. It's happened to me to translate something I'd already translated, and I don't translate it the same at all. So it's like there's so many possibilities, and you always work, I always work with the French synonym dictionary, a thesaurus. And that's my main tool, because the meaning is nothing. The meaning is, of course, it's important. And in the old days, you could see a lot of translations where they didn't get the meaning, and that's a bit of a catastrophe. But they didn't have the internet, so we have to be a bit nice with them. But it's all about finding the voice in the target language, as they say, the language that will be published in.
I was talking there in Melbourne to French translator Mireille Vignol, who was just about to host a translation slam, and I was staying with poet Peter Bakowski, who Mireille was visiting. I asked Peter, who attended the event, what he thought, and he thought that one of the translators took way too many liberties in translating, and that if it was his original work being translated, he would not be amused. And he thought that the text chosen could also have been better, being writing to do with hippies, surfers. He wasn't terribly taken with that either, but he thought Mireille controlled the session beautifully and was very diplomatic.
Interesting idea. I wonder how often we'll see a translation slam.
I may never attend one.
This is Sundaku, the podcast for addicted readers, and I'd like to dedicate this one to my great uncle Jim, who I never met, but I was told used to wander down from the far north of South Australia, always arrived, he was a uranium prospector, always arrived with a Penguin book in his back pocket, I guess in the days when the books were a bit smaller.
Pocket editions.
Hi, my name is Dan. I am 41 years of age. I didn't really read as a kid. I wasn't really a man of literature. I didn't really know how to concentrate and read a book till about the age of 25. And thinking about the book that started me off, that particular book, a book about World War II, Darwin, the bombing of Darwin, which my grandpa read to me, and then I subsequently picked up years later and read and thoroughly enjoyed that. Now, to the age of 41, I've continued that. I've really been right into non-fiction books, lots of war stuff. I'm really interested in World War II, World War I. Got into a lot of aviation literature, air crashes. I'm quite fascinated. I have a morbid fascination in air crashes, and I've read a lot of books about air crashes and obviously a tragedy that it's happened. But there's always, there's an engineering side to it, and it results in a lot of safety developments. So a lot of that kind of stuff. Air crashes, World War II, a bit of philosophy even these days, Stoicism, a bit interested in. By my bed, I have a very intriguing book called QF32, which is about an Airbus aircraft which had a catastrophic malfunction of an engine, Airbus A380 that had an engine malfunction, and it was about the captain, a biography of his life basically, up to the point of him safely landing this plane after it had an engine mishap.
And we'd love to hear from you. If you're keen to share your reading habits, your reading past, send us a review or a little glimpse of your tsundoku. Send us a voice memo anytime to tsundokukast@gmail.com.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm Annie Hastwell.
And I'm Cath Keneally. Catch you next time.
This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts refusing treatment.
Cath Keneally.
Michaela Andreev.
Sarah Martin.
And me, Annie Hastwell. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. If you want to know more about the books and authors featured in this episode, check out the show notes. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Tsundokukast. That's TSUNDOKU cast.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.